Yeah, so why don't we all settle into silence? And Erica, when you're ready, please proceed.
Okay. Well, to end the suspense, thank you for inviting me or having me. And I made this as a kind of follow-up for the talks I gave at Sessions the last 2 years and at Quaker Institute for the Future this past 2019 it was, in West Falmouth Quaker meeting where I'm from. Can everyone hear me? Okay, well that's good. Am I loud enough? All right, all right, all right. So I've been working, and I'm very pleased to have two people here in particular. One, Carlota Duarte, who's in Chiapas, Mexico, and here on Zoom. And she started the Chiapas Photography Project about 1992 to give the tools of photography to the Maya there to do whatever they wanted to. And they have about 12 books and a couple of traveling shows. And they've been all over the world. And so it's a very important project. And I met her in 1990. And before she started the project, we both lived in Cambridge. She's a sister of the Society of the Sacred Heart. And Larry Larry Jordan helped me get the first legacy grant to basically show this show, which is about Maya religious diversity and coexistence after decades of strife in Chiapas, Mexico. It's called Respeto, or Respect for the Religious Practices and Belief Systems. And I co-curated that with Carlota, or we were curatorial assistants to the very organized Maya. And so today I'm talking about peace in terms of conflict, times of conflict, excuse me. And it's in 3 sections: quarantine, riots, and monuments, something I think we've all been watching on screen. And I decided to do something in a more personal way, along with facts, because having grown up with my father, who was a think tank person, all branches of government, he did public policy. Facts and statistics, I know, can be bent in any direction. So I imagine that I'm just as, how to say, personalized as anybody else of my own belief system. Okay, so let's see, how do I get this to go? Peace, it's a question, how much peace is, we're talking about the United States, have we really had? And I looked at all the major wars, all this easily available information, and then the American Indian Wars. I honestly, with 8-point type, did not have enough space to put it on one page. But these are the majority of what was listed. And so you see the American Civil War, the Revolutionary War, and I put in the Civil Rights Movement and what I called the George Floyd Rebellion. The last Indian uprising was about 1923, and it started 1776, the Cherokee American Wars. So I think that goes without saying. And then I was thinking about Boston, where basically I grew up in Boston and I moved to the Cape 20 years ago. And continued to commute to Boston to teach at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts, which was the art school that's part of Tufts University. And on 9/11, I was starting my first class. And everything was evacuated by 11 o'clock. The terrorists flew out of Logan Airport, which maybe if you don't live here, you've forgotten that. And so the atmosphere was very particular. There was no traffic at 8:30 in the morning in downtown Boston when I drove to the museum school in the Fenway district of Boston, near all the hospitals. And when I drove home late at night, there wasn't a single car on the highway for 70 miles. And then when I got to the bridge to cross Cape Cod, I could see the bottom of the canal. And I got home and there was a girl wrapped in an American flag, and she had been one of two people in a helicopter, don't ask me what kind, I don't know this, that flew out of Otis Air Force Base. And they had hoped to, shoot the airplane that was going into the second tower. And to give you an idea, they missed by 1 or 2 minutes, and it took them 7 minutes to fly from, it wasn't a helicopter, fly from Cape Cod to New York City. It's faster than we go. So, and then I came back from Mexico, and then Italy on my sabbatical, where I'd been doing different projects. And there was a Boston Marathon bombing about 2 weeks after I got home. And everybody I know, including myself, has stories about their proximity to this or that. And where it ended up, they found one of the terrorists in a boat, and it was in Watertown in the shared driveway that belonged to my friend's house. So there were no degrees of separation, really. Very traumatizing. Also, when I got out of grad school in the late 80s, I worked at Cambridge Rindge and Latin, which is a public high school, and they teach everything in 9 different languages. Anything you might imagine. They teach chemistry in Cantonese and Vietnamese and so on. So it was very, we could say, multicultural. And I know teachers who had the 2 bombers in their classes, and you know, they had the best of everything, and they had Cambridge for whatever that means. And they ended up really hating this country as immigrants. Well, and then, of course, we have the Portland masked men. I love this. Masked men clad indistinguishably from soldiers, yanking civilians off the street in the dead of night and throwing them into unmarked cars is the modus operandi of totalitarian regimes or the stuff of dystopian fiction. I think, you know, we're all on screens right now, and some of us are in the street, that this is the most frightening thing that I've seen in my entire life. So quarantine, who expected quarantine? I wish in a way that we could do breakouts in between each section, but I don't think this is going to happen. So I came back from Boston and I put myself in quarantine when Harvard University closed down Sanders Theater, where I hear all kinds of wonderful concerts. And I've been going there for 50 years. And when I understood that the students weren't coming back, that they were going to go online, I knew that something was terribly up and frightening. So in Massachusetts in particular, the first case was February 1st. I myself was sick, but tests proved I wasn't sick with COVID, but it was something else. And it was a very rapid increase. And I think that's what we're all worried about, is how quickly this spreads. And March 10th, the Governor Baker declared a state of emergency, and I'd already been in quarantine 2 days. And so this all happened really quickly. And March 12th, 100 people had tested positive and no one was being tested. Mid-March, systematic testing began, and I had friends who did that. It was really amazing in Cambridge in particular. And then March 15th, all the schools were closed, restaurants, gatherings of more than 25. And then the CARES Act relaxed some unemployment claims for receiving benefits. March 23rd was a stay-at-home advisory, and it closed all non-essential businesses, including construction. March 22nd, 7th, they extended the tax deadline, and remote learning happened in Harvard, MIT, Tufts, and BU, and many other colleges. And then on the 30th, 43,000 tests were done by Quest Diagnostics. Boston Mayor Walsh announced April 2nd that there were field hospitals. Tufts University set up dormitories, for example, as a possible field hospital. I don't think it was needed. A curfew was given April 5th, and masks in public were mandatory. And then MIT did a preliminary study, I thought this was interesting, of sewage. About 115,000 regions were, 2.3 million were infected. And they only had 646 confirmed cases in the area. April 28th to May 28th was an extended stay at home. And whoops, wait a minute, the surge was over, typically 22nd to 31st. And then phase 2 happened when childcare, day camps, retail stores, outings could open. And in June 22nd, we had the lowest, Massachusetts, the lowest transmission in the country. And July 2nd, phase 3 was including gyms, casinos, and museums, which have been suspended. They're no longer opened. 29th of July, COVID-19 deaths were 7,243 of 8,580. 84% are 70 and older. So what does this mean? I think it bears saying again that it exposed the fault lines, the income inequality, who could stay home and work, who had to depend on CARES Act, which was for part-time workers, who had to go to work. And it exposed the systemic racism with African Americans dying at a higher rate than the percentage of the population. It exposed sexism, who had to go to work and how, and classism, who had money to get by as if it was an extended vacation. Medical insurance crisis. It was probably the best case we could have since the Depression, that we should have a unified national health care. Housing crisis was exposed. As of July 30th, the insurance of the $600 a month is being reduced. And they're again playing with the elderly, the disabled, and the poor, deciding how much they'll be getting. And people who didn't have to pay their rent for the first 3 months of the quarantine are now many facing evictions, and mortgages are going unpaid. And then food insecurity. There are more people. I saw lines in the beginning of cars out west for middle-class people trying to get food. Okay, so the unemployment rate in Massachusetts in March was 2.9. Boston in particular had the most, how to say it, one of the strongest, 8 strongest economies in the United States. So good. You saw buildings going up everywhere. Cranes were everywhere. It was flush, like Silicon Valley was flush. And if you were here in Boston, you couldn't know how badly things were already in the rest of the country. And so that was 2.9% versus 4.4% of the rest of the United States. And by June, it was 17.4%. The Great Depression was 25.6%. And then I opened the New York Times, which I read every day, the paper version. And on Friday, July 31st, it says virus wipes out 5 years of economic growth. So Wilson is working from home. And we did Zoom almost immediately. We started mid-March at West Falmouth meeting, and these are some of the people in the meeting. And also for the apology letter, the New England Yearly Meeting apology letter to Native Americans, we were working on Zoom. You can see Leslie Manning here, and she's now presenting this at sessions, and then myself. And so the CARES Act was huge. I mean, it allowed a lot of people to survive. And again, the $600 a week will stop being paid on July 31st until something is added. And this allowed people to pay their bills and the economy to thrive in a way that it won't without that money. And so everybody had to do information gathering simply because no one really knew. The medical community, as strong as it is in Boston, with all the teaching hospitals, nobody really knew anything about COVID. And so everyone was learning on the job. And it was very important for everybody, I think, I did, to look at all the sources you could get and read. I must have read 10 articles a day. I turned on American news, and then I started to wonder, okay, where's the leadership now? I mean, this is an ongoing issue, right? And so Dr. Fauci had to speak between the lines. I think most of us could read it. And Nancy Pelosi got the CARES Act passed, which was amazing. And then we had Donald Trump, who was in denial. I mean, a friend of mine said he was a mass murderer, and I thought this is a bit extreme. That was in the beginning of April. I don't think that now. I think his policies have killed many, many people. So I started wondering, do I trust these people to let my news? How counterproductive is it to have to deconstruct everything that the president says and how he squelches Fauci? So I started looking in other places, and on my phone, I got inspiration from listening to the very militaristic approach of no nonsense New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who would tell you what was going on. And you know, a little of that for me was a nice morning dose, as good as the espresso that I have, the triple espresso that sort of gets me going. And then I thought Angela Merkel was like a breath of fresh air. And then she got diagnosed with coronavirus. And Justin Trudeau, this is his most recent look, is very easy to look at, and he's got great policy. So I listened to his podcast or his conferences when they came across. Recently, he's extended the very generous benefits for the Canadian citizens to also include the fact that they can go to work and earn money and keep their benefits if they want to. I go to Montreal for the last 40 years, 2 or 3 times a year. I have friends there, and I'm very impressed by how the Canadians are handling things. So I started listening to BBC. I don't know what everybody else has done, but that's what I could do because they had a broader view, and I could hear just as much about what was going on with Trump. So March 31st, we're like, what, 3 weeks into the whole session of quarantine, and our deaths have surpassed 9/11. So they're a kind of achievement. And the quarantine's effects, I started to wonder about them: physical, psychological, metaphysical, spiritual. And I'm very interested in hearing other people's responses to how they experienced the quarantine. And we had lots of graphs, you know, high risk, moderate risk, low risk. Opening the mail is a low risk. Going to a bar is a high risk. You know, I mean, it's nice to have these graphs because there was so much unknown and there was so much underlying anxiety that was going on. And the psychological effects. I mean, did you have a spouse? Did you have children or grandchildren living with you? Were you like me, just living at home with your orchids and no cat and no dog? What was your situation? As an artist who taught at a university and prepared my classes at home, working at home is a no-brainer, but I found it difficult to focus. I could focus on small articles in the New York Times, for example, or listen to news reports in BBC, and that was it. So some of the things that I started to do was the Chiapas Photography Project. I'm a US coordinator, and I'm the only one really here. So I circulate the traveling shows and the books when people buy them, and arrange other things. So this is the new book that just came out. It was a 15-year project by Refugia Guzman Perez, and it was just published. And so I got a local dean of the college to write a review on it. We're still trying to circulate. I'm working with Carlotta to find places to show this beautiful show, which has about 28 photographs and is about respect for beliefs, religions, and rituals, and crosses over nicely. My 2 legacy grants said so, for the peace testimony of Quakers. And so this is one of the things that we're doing, and that's sort of business as usual in a way. If there's interest, I have a PDF of the entire show, or I can send you to a link afterwards. The other thing I did is I decided, well, I have a wonderful studio. I have a library filled with books I've read and those I haven't. And that what I could do is I could work in my studio. I'm in my studio now because it's air conditioned. It's the only place in the house that's air conditioned. And I put white cloths behind so you don't have to look at all my machinery. So I started to think just in a very abstract way, which I don't usually do, so that it wouldn't be content driven. And so it would be about the colors and the shapes, the feeling that it generated. And some people did yoga. I connected with friends all over the world through Zoom. One of them was in Italy, and where quarantine was really frightening. She couldn't leave the house unless they called ahead to go shopping. And she would do yoga, but I just watched. And so this is my kind of yoga, to try to center and to try to feel out where I was. And it was called May a Simple Light Rise from a Complicated Darkness. That was the first of about 20 small ones that I've made. And then came the riots. About 2 months into quarantine. My personal feeling is that the quarantine focused people on essentials. You know, we couldn't leave the house. We grocery shopped almost never. And people got into cooking and listening to music and watching Netflix and things like this. And to my shock, I turned on the TV, my mistake. And Monday on the 25th, I saw this. And I thought, I can't believe that I'm watching this. How is this happening? One, how is this happening? Two, how is it on TV? Why is nobody doing anything? Why is this happening? And in 8 minutes, George Floyd was dead. And I'd watched the whole thing. I don't think I've still gotten over this. And I think that the quarantine had focused people and quieted people to such an extent that it acted like a funnel. And with this, it exploded. And here's a disclaimer. My brother lived in St. Paul for 33 years. And with his new girlfriend, he's 59 to her 56. They bought a new house in 1915 and in a new neighborhood across the Mississippi River in Minneapolis. And all of this that you're about to see happened in their new neighborhood. Where everything was burned down was a 10-minute bike ride. And it was where my brother was glad to have a post office he could walk to or bike to, restaurants, movie theaters, everything. So the next day, there were peaceful protests. And so the question remains, what happened? More peaceful protests. This is Wednesday, 2 days later. And this is a Native American building, apartment building that was under construction that was burned to the ground. And here, people are cordoned off. Everything's relatively peaceful. You've got, you know, the American police in their usual gear. And this on Thursday, the 28th, is a downtown Minneapolis protest. For those who don't live in Minneapolis, this is a bridge because it gets so cold there and nobody wants to walk outside. So they have lots of these in the downtown area to connect up office buildings like the ones my brother works in. So it took 2 days for things to start burning down. How did it go from peaceful to non-peaceful? Well, this is where I have inside information. Now, whatever you think of Facebook, mine is mostly artists and musicians, writers, people like that, scholars. And then my brother and his girlfriend and their friends, most of whom I know. And so I started to see these things pop up. And this was the first one. And I thought, you know, I mean, we're supposed to wear masks outside, but who has something like this? And who uses an umbrella? And you can see in his hand, this is a sledgehammer that he also has. And you can see somebody here, looks like a Rastafarian, encountering him. And so I received these two posts on my email from my brother's friends. And there were many, many things going on. And it talked about this man who had methodically, and some, I don't have the videos, posted him just methodically breaking the windows like this. And who's methodical like this? And so this was the first building to be set on fire. And the protests that were peaceful started in front of the police station. And this is a place called the AutoZone, where you could see it on PBS News right here, AutoZone. This is where he started here. And everybody on the Facebook from Minneapolis was saying that he's not like anybody else. You know, he's methodical. And It was yesterday, 2 days ago, July 8th in the New York Times. I got this first on a link. It said Minneapolis police link the umbrella man, which is this man, to white supremacy groups, that he smashed store windows with a sledgehammer to provoke racial unrest. And I would say that was very successful. In a short time after the windows were broken in the auto zone, the looting started within hours. And here's the link if you wanted that link. So there were many, many things, but that was the main one. That was the 28th. So the 27th, this is the post office where my brother was so excited to be able to walk to. And I'm not sure what building this was, but it's not there anymore. This is the library. And they have now received donations from all over the world, including mine, to buy new books and to clean it up. What was lost? The police station, post office burned to the ground. The library is right here, you can see that. And the Native American Cultural Center burned. A Native American apartment house being constructed burned to the ground. Yoga studios, cafes, Target, AutoZone, the Cup grocery store, restaurants, Somali, Hmong, Japanese. It's very multicultural. Minnesota is one of 2 places in the United States that process refugees. The other was Portland, Maine, and there were a lot of Somali and Hmong there. Ilhan Omar, the representative, came out of this community, the Somali community. So Thursday, this is the Minneapolis police station. It's still extant. And the demonstrators surrounded in the 3rd precinct. It starts to become engulfed in flames. And then the mayor, he's a former civil rights lawyer, Mayor Jacob Frey. And he basically said last night is the result of so much built up anger and frustration. And he, at this point, on Thursday, everything was in flames, about 5 miles in flames. It went Friday. The National Guard came out. It cost them $13 million. At first, they were going to send 500. I was on the phone with my brother, and this is his neighborhood. This is an apartment house. They blocked off on Saturday. The National Guard blocked off this end of each street. They asked the residents to go inside their houses and shelter in place. And on the internet, Facebook, my friend's brother said that, and my brother told me the same on the phone call, that they had found huge caches of water bottles filled with gasoline in their back alleys. Every house has a backyard and then a back alley with a garage in it where the trash is picked up, where they park. And so it's a different construction than, say, in Boston. And they also found wood soaked with gasoline and also caches. The plan was that these cars that were reported by my brother seeing it, his girlfriend seeing it, and on his Facebook friends and mine reporting this, that there were large SUVs and Jeeps coming in from out of state, and that there were lots of really well-heeled agitators, out-of-state agitators. These were actually, there were 100 arrests made just in St. Paul alone on the following Monday. And about 90% of them were out of state. They were highly funded. They were well-heeled. They had brand new cars. And in some cases, they had taken the license plate off, but not in all cases. The National Guard swelled to 2,000 people. They closed off the bridge from the river, from St. Paul to Minneapolis. They closed off the highway. They closed off all the neighborhoods, and my brother evacuated his building, his new house on Saturday. He came back on Sunday. Meanwhile, in Boston, the daytime was peaceful, and it mirrored what went on in Minneapolis. And the mayor, Marty Walsh, said he thanked the protesters who exercised their right of free speech effectively and peacefully, making sure everyone hears their message, but said he was angered by the people who came into our city, outsiders, and chose to engage in acts of destruction, violence, and undermining their message. So this is the aftermath of where the citizens are cleaning up. Walgreens, tattoo piercing place. This is the library. This is also the library here. These are taken by my brother's girlfriend, Allie Kress. This is a restaurant, rodeo restaurant. And this is on Saturday, just before they abandoned their house because they were so afraid. Here's shrines. These are my brother's photographs of the people made to George Floyd, and some people taking pictures. My brother said some of his neighbors had, which I suspect this is, had arsenals of their own. And they were sitting in chairs like this in front of their stores, and those were the only ones that weren't damaged, because anybody came close, they had submachine guns, whatever's legal around there, they had that. So these are again, my brother's pictures. These are the shrines that people were making, the art that people made. And this monument went up. I didn't have enough research on this. This is obviously blocked off. This is the middle of the street. They blocked this off as if it was a park already and the traffic could go around it. And this clenched fist is going to be probably permanent. It's being decided now. And this was Saturday, May 30th. It had been up maybe a day, and it's still, to this day, it's up 2 months later. So the third section is on monuments. There's been a lot of talk in publications, on television, about who's represented by whom and what do these monuments say. And they've been victims and targets. So I decided to take a very personal point of view for this, and to start with the Boston Public Garden, where I grew up in Boston. And my grandmother, I have a picture somewhere, this is not it, of my grandmother and her mother. Her mother is standing right in front of this, but a little bit forward. There's a Arlington Street right here, and then Newbury Street, where all the fancy hairdresser places and the boutiques are. And it's the same period of time, 1903. She's all dressed in black. My grandmother was born in 1900, had a big bow that went to her shoulder. She was 3 years old. And they were quite formal on a hot day. And so this is what the George Washington Monument, still there, this is contemporary time, looked like. About 1869, it was unveiled, and the sculptor was relatively obscure. And it was funded mostly by local citizens and constructed by Massachusetts artists and artisans. And this is a Venus rising in the sea. So, I mean, we can say maybe who this appeals to is from another time and place, but I think in a public space, that's always been the attraction of monuments. As an artist, I know how much it takes to learn the skills, to get the commission, to build it, to get it up. And with historians in my family, I know how important it is to have our history. Also, it's very important to be represented. I never particularly connected to these men on horses, but there was one sculpture I liked for the tactility and of the sandstone, the color that was in it, which is in Commonwealth Avenue in downtown Boston, but surrounded by highway interconnections now. So it's very hard just to park and to go and see it. I connected to this because my grandfather's from Sweden, and this is a very storybook type view of Leif Erikson, who came in 1000 AD and discovered various parts in America. Some people say he got as far as Cape Cod. We certainly know that he was in Quebec, Nova Scotia area. And so when I researched this, I found out I was very disappointed to learn who really funded it and why they funded it. At the time, 1887, there were a lot of Italians and Irish coming in, and what we call as the Beacon Hill Blue Bloods. They're the English who were very rich, the Cabots, the lodges, and so on. They were very disturbed, especially by the Italians that were coming into Boston, and they wanted to create a kind of myth, which is all sculpture is really, public sculpture is myth making. And they decided they would take it away from, make it more northern. And so, I mean, Leif Erikson is basically Scandinavian. It's this far north as you can get without being in Antarctic. So I was very disappointed to learn the one representation of my multi-ethnic, but invisible to most people, ethnicity was in fact done for curious and not so kosher reasons. Of particular interest to me was this when I was a kid. I think I can, wait a minute, make it this one. No, I can't change that. Okay, it's a little bit fuzzy, but down here you can see it better. It's on the Black History Trail, which is separate from the Boston History Trail. It's really worth your time to go do it if you're in Boston. This was 1897. So when industrialization after the Civil War was happening and there was finally some money, what happened is 3 museums opened. The Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and the Boston Museum of Art, those 3. And they were opened by the new rich industrialist to give the working class a place to connect spiritually with beauty through art. And that was their motivation. And so monument building was also part of it, because this, of course, was a very, very young country. And this is the first documented American regiment. And what's this, is Shaw, is it Shaw? So Auguste Saint-Gaudens is a very, very high-end sculpture, very well known. And again, it was the citizens who donated it. This would have been just people like you and me, as well as rich people. And in fact, it wasn't the first real voluntary African-American regiment, which was 1863. And this was because many soldiers came as far as the north, the Caribbean to the north to join this. It started out of Boston, and these were northern racist sentiments that kept African Americans from taking up arms for the United States in the early years of the Civil War. However, a clause from Abraham Lincoln's 1863 Emancipation Proclamation made it possible for the organization of African American to volunteer regiments. And Robert Gould Shaw family was very wealthy and connected in Boston and New York. They were radical abolitionists and Unitarians. And the African Americans actually also served in the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. And so what could possibly be wrong with this? Well, you know, I went to art school, so this to me is a no-brainer. Essentially, what would be objectionable is that the Shaw is on a horse leading his men who are on foot, and they're African American and he's white. So it's a matter of hierarchy. I mean, people have different reasons for wanting to pull things down. So far, this has not been touched. I lived in Lexington through most of my junior high and high school years. And every year they would recreate the 1776 battle, which was considered the first revolutionary battle. And so this sculpture was unveiled in 1900. So we're really talking about 1870, 1900. All of these sculptures that marked public areas were put up. And this is absolutely in the center. This here, the park, is where the battle happened before they went on to Concord. And it was Henry Hudson Kitson who did it. And it was a tribute to Parker and the colonists who armed themselves against the British and the Pequot Indians. And when we went to the museum, which was about every Sunday, I saw this. And I thought it was quite a beautiful statue. And I know as an artist later on, his hands were supposed to be up like this, but that's very hard to do without them falling. So they ended up down as you see them, because structurally that was possible. And this was called Appeal to the Great Spirit. It's right in front of the museum, and then you can't see it, but over the front door, which is behind it, there is a pharaoh's head from a sandstone monument. The Boston Museum was one of the first to support archaeology in Egypt. So this is what I saw, and there are serious questions about this. Cyrus Dallin, there's now a museum in Arlington, argued the piece should, the director argued the piece should be reinterpreted in context of today. That's what we're really talking about. And then in the Boston Globe in July, Joseph Zordon, a former curatorial intern at the MFA and a member of the Bad River Ojibwe Nation, the essays published on the website of the museum, he described the harm that the piece represents, the great appeal to the spirit. He writes beautifully, Dallin, who, by the way, was from out west, and he was so rough and ready that when he came to the art schools in Boston, he was considered beneath contempt because he was so crude. And he lived and was raised around the Native Americans in the West. And so he felt like he was valorizing them. But this is what Joseph Zordon thinks in July 2020. Dallin has taken our grief as indigenous peoples and cast and immobilized it in bronze, cursed to hang in the air forever, with lips parted and eyes frozen wide open. So far, nobody's hit this. And then this is in the South End, which used to be houses for the very rich and then became tenement houses and apartments for the poor. And then housing projects were built in the 60s and 70s. And so people moved out of dilapidated townhouses into these structures. And so now today it's a mix of very rich who've done over these 19th century townhouses and a lot of African-American population that lives there. This is a emancipation group at Harriet Tubman Square in Boston. And this sculpture, I forget when it was put up, but it was in the last, I think, 15 years. And it's quite beautiful. And it has this little park all to itself, very small. And this is Edmund Berry Gaither, who's the director and curator of Boston's Museum of the National Center for African American Arts. He said, public space has always been a battle terrain, especially for those with really progressive points of view. And he said, public space generally reflects the voice and the vision of the status quo. And what does that do? You'll find facile explanations of the relationship between one group and another that are simply false to human experience. And this was also subject to violence. It was harmed during the riots. And then we have a now headless Christopher Columbus in the Christopher Columbus Park, which is on the edge of a traditionally Italian neighborhood that before that was traditionally Jewish. And before that, I think it was Irish. And so this went up recently. I didn't even put the date. So anyway, I think, yeah, 1997, this was erected. And during the riots in Boston, he became headless. And one person said that he is not a beacon of American fortitude, bravery, or discovery. He's a patron saint of colonial violence. Leave the statue up and let the real conversation begin. So Marty Walsh has decided to store it away to avoid recklessness and, you know, talk about restoration of it and then let the serious conversations begin and maybe a recontextualization. Harvard University Law School was founded by the largest slave owner in Massachusetts. Royal was his last name with 2 L's. He had slaves in the Caribbean and he decided to make a house next to Cambridge in the town of Medford. It's now a museum that has a lot of people come and talk about slavery, including slavery in the North. And I think that the context of talking about what should be done in that particular case, they talked about taking his name off of the front of the law school. And I thought that was erasure of history, which bothers me personally a lot. And that what should happen is inside there should be a very large explanation of who this man was, what his implication for slavery was, and what the amount of money that Harvard got from it. I mean, essentially we can say that in my upbringing in the North, in the Boston area, we were told that slavery was a Southern problem. And so it's very interesting for me to read many books and hear many scholars in the last 20 years talk about exactly what kind of slavery happened in Boston and who was responsible. There's lots of books. So monuments, and the Metropolitan Museum has hired an artist from Kenya who lives in New York, and she decided to use African and Western art, and it's called a caryatid. It's those figures that hold up, like columns, hold up the Parthenon or the Acropolis in Greece. So they have a long history. And then these coils are meant to be like the coils in the neck of African women that separate the head from the body. And these are temporary installations that are there longer because of the quarantine. And so she put a disc, which often on the mouth, there would be a mouth disc that would stretch the mouth open like that. And so she took that inspiration and she used it on the head. And this is a mirrored disc so that light will shine on the disc. And it's a very feminist kind of presentation. It's celestial, it's humanoid, and she calls it the new ones will free us. And I think this is what you would see if you walked up the big steps of the Metropolitan Museum. So, anti-monuments. Here is the destruction that we saw, and the anger that we saw, and the alienation that we saw for monuments that are everywhere. About 2 years before this 1818 Declaration of Independence painting by John Trumbull, which is in, I think it's not in the White House, I mean, maybe in Congress. The artist, Arlene Parsa, put red dots over all of the founding fathers of the Declaration of Independence that had slaves. You can see there's very few that did not have slaves. 3/4 of them owned slaves. Okay, now in my research online, I found this headline, "Projections at the Lee Monument Offer Peace in Times of Violence." And I thought, so peace in times of conflict, there we are. It's come full circle. And she talks about, in this article in July 5th, 2020, Aaron Parker, who smoked a cigarette and looked at all the graffiti that you'll see all over the Robert E. Lee Monument, who was revered as a not so bad enslaver who fought for states' rights. He looked up and he saw the projections that you're about to see, and he felt empowered as a Black man. And that these are anchored by tributes to people who fought slavery and lined by old money homes. That's the context of the neighborhood. And so you're going to see these. And the projections, by the way, were an artist who's white and another artist who's Black. So Dustin Klein is white and Alex Creaky is African-American. So this is before in Richmond, Virginia, and this is after with George Floyd and Black Lives Matter on it. You can see all the graffiti that wasn't there before. So I showed you all the things that I grew up with, right? I mean, as an artist, I can say I was horrified. As someone who loves history, I was thinking, well, you know, this can be cleaned, that can be cleaned. And then as a futurist, I thought, this is some of the best art I've seen in I don't know how long. So we can say I'm a split personality. So the governor ordered the removal of the statue, of course, and a judge blocked the decision, the Democratic governor, for 10 days. And the spokesperson for the Sons of Confederate Veterans, I think this is quite good. He condemned the toppling of public works of art and likened losing the Confederate statues to losing a family member. I mean, George Washington meant very little on his horse to me, and I'm second-generation American. It could have been enough time. But it was Leif Erikson that really moved me. And then when I found out that it was blue bloods that were English and rich that wanted to have a farther north representation of America to avoid all those Italians and Irish that were coming into Boston, I was less than pleased. If the Indian came down, I would be less than pleased. My aunt lived on a Navajo reservation the last 25 years of her life after the Smithsonian hired her to make paintings of the vanishing tribes. But then there were other feelings. So look what they did. These are all projections. This has gone on for a couple of weeks. How powerful is that? How amazing is that? And the idea of projection actually started with a Polish artist who's at MIT for the last decade or two, Christoph, and he did projections on the Bunker Hill Monument in Boston. That was another project he did. So this is a kind of an acceptable form in art, these projections, recontextualizing a monument known to everybody with very important information. The time is always right to do what's right. Slavery is the next thing to hell. Harriet Tubman, MLK. And then Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. And then LGBTQ, there's so many letters now. I remember when it was simpler. Yeah, so, and then this is Malcolm X. And then this is Angela Davis. It was nice to see a woman there. And I don't know if anybody didn't see this. And these aren't necessarily artists. This is whoever showed up. I thought this was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And then from a height, you could see this all the way to the, I think it's the White House is right there. The monument's right there. So that was breathtaking. So to end it on an optimistic note, even though we lost John Lewis this week, in the New York Times, it was published. I don't know if you can see this. I don't know where I am on this screen. If you can see this, New York Times. He said he wanted this essay, his last essay, to be published the day of his funeral. And he said, together you can redeem the soul of our nation. Though I am gone, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and to stand up for what you truly believe. He was born in 1940 and he died this year, 2020. And this essay, should I read the essay? Give me the hands up or hands down. No, thank you so much. My voice is about to go. So here's the essay. And how can I get out of this? Stop share. Yeah, okay, I'm back. So comments, please, some kind of any comments.